Hello, and welcome to Action Surge, the series where we take a deep dive into your turn in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. Today we will be exploring the Use an Object action. In the open world design of a game like Dungeons & Dragons, there are many things to interact with. The Use an Object action is the primary means in which you are going to be going about this task. Whether you are attempting to open up a portcullis, rifle through all of your belongings, finding everything you need for your next round in combat, or simply going through that treasure chest before the enemy can get to you, the Use an Object action is the means of interacting with the world, whatever you are attempting to do. Let's go ahead and take a look at the mechanics in the game. You normally interact with an object while doing something else, such as when you draw a sword as part of an attack. When an object requires your action for its use, you take the Use an Object action. This action is also useful when you want to interact with more than one object on your turn. Now that we've looked at the mechanics of the Use an Object action, when would you want to use this? Well, that's the wonderful thing about the Use an Object action. It's very rarely something that you decide to deliberately do. The Use an Object action comes up when you have a wonderful idea of what you want your character to do, and this is a mechanic that the Dungeon Master can fall back on as describing what your character is doing in the rules of the game. Typically, you will try to use your interaction to use an object most of the time, whether that's drawing a sword, opening up a chest, or pulling a single item from your backpack. When you will most likely be using the Use an Object action, it's because you have done more than you otherwise would have. This might be drawing multiple weapons or stowing a weapon and drawing a weapon. This might be taking off your backpack for a moment, pulling out everything you need and throwing it back over your shoulder. This could be using something in the environment that the Dungeon Master has already planned for you to use, like a portcullis, and they will have described how many actions it takes to open and close the portcullis fully, or it might be something that the Dungeon Master has to come up with on the fly, such as you wanting to take an armoire and push it in front of a door. Yeah, sure, you can move from the armoire to the door easily, but it may take your action to physically move it. What is going to take an action for the Use an Object action is going to be a conversation between you and your Dungeon Master. Sometimes they may require you to use your action to manipulate an object. Other times, they'll hand wave it as a small thing. Picking up a glass as you walk by the table, easily done. Knocking over a chandelier as you go by, no problem. It's the larger things, picking up the chandelier and starting to light candles, that might take your action. This is going to be a conversation between you and your Dungeon Master, so I cannot tell you everything this entails. This is going to be something that you discover through the process. However, that process is going to come from the storytelling and the things you want to do. So let's take a moment and look at some of the more specifics on different ways you can tell your story, even though you might be mechanically doing the same thing as the next player after you. With such a generalized action as the Use an Object action, the storytelling aspect of this in combat is fantastic. The wonderful thing about this is the fact that by the time you are doing the action Use an Object, you have already established your story. Most of the time when you're going to use an object as your action, you've already decreed, I want to blank. I'm going to blank. You are already putting yourself in a narrative standpoint where you are going away from what's on your character sheet. You are going away from your attack rolls, your spells, your class abilities. You are already interacting with the environment, describing the fact that you are going to take that wardrobe and pushing it in front of the door. Because of this, there's less of a need to roll the dice to find out what happens, and you are already describing the actions in progress. With this, the Dungeon Master will decide whether simply using your action on such a task is necessary, or if you need to make some other die roll to aid it along. Now, if you do have to make the die roll, it is nice to be able to have multiple endings of where this small moment can lead. Whether that's something like pushing the armoire where it may, as opposed to sliding in front of the door, it may topple and fall over. It may snag on the rug. You have so many different hindrances that you can come up with, as well as a very solid success. And that's going to be something that you will discover as a big part of the generalized use an object action. If you do have to make a die roll, typically the success is the simple part. You are already doing the thing you set out to do. It's when you fail the roll that you have a little bit more of a flourish on what happens. There are various levels of failure. There is nearly doing the thing you wanted to do. There is, a moderate failure, and then there is rolling a 5 when you needed a 15. Because there's so many different ways that you can describe something not happening, in this case, it's almost more of a story benefit to fail at this action. But that is if you are rolling the dice on it. Many times when you use an object, there's going to be no die roll needed. If it's something like stowing a weapon and drawing another one, that is going to take 2 object interactions. It's going to take 1 to stow, 1 to draw. You already know that your turn is going to be complete. You know that you're going to succeed at the thing you want to do. In that case, you have all the more freedom to tell your story on any other aspect of the combat. If the only thing you're doing is switching out weaponry, take that moment to call out weaknesses that you're seeing on the monster. Take that moment to check in with other members of the party. You have all of the time in your disposal. You are not making a very strategic play. You are not doing something that is going to highly change the battlefield environment some of the time, but that does not mean that you don't get to take your turn telling the narrative. And with your character doing something of possibly lesser effort, that opens you up for much more conversation than would possibly happen on a given turn where you are running across the battlefield and making 3 attacks. Now, that is if you're doing something simple, like changing out weaponry. You can also use an object to try and knock down a boulder off a cliff. You can do it to try to lower a chandelier either onto an enemy or simply to change the environment, in which case, if a die roll is needed, play into that die roll. If you fail, call out, yelp, try and get other players to help you. They may not choose to help you, you may not want them to help you, but at least taking that moment of your character's reaction to the situation as opposed to yours as a player can greatly change how the other players see the narrative evolving. Now, another wonderful use of this use an object action is if, for instance, not only are you switching out weaponry, but you want to pull off your backpack and completely go through it, and you're looking for something particular. Maybe you're pulling out a bag of holding that takes an action to get something specific out, or maybe you're just trying to get out all of the healing potions you can because you realize your party's going to need them. Either way, this is a wonderful time to go through your inventory. Depending what you're doing, this is an opportunity to call out, hey, does anyone need the rope if you are trying to trip up a creature? If you are currently fighting something with fire breath, you can go through like, does anyone have a potion of resistance? And like, you can use that as a battlefield strategic point in the story and something that you are talking about related to your current action. A lot of this is going to be whatever your use an object action is, use that for inspiration to jump off of for narrative beats. It could only be tangentially related to what you're doing, but it does give you the ability to retake control of the narrative, and as opposed to telling other player characters what they should be doing on their turn, you can give them ideas of how they want to aid you in what you're doing. All of that was very vague, jumping all over the place. But that is the nature of the use an object action. There are so many different things that you can do with it. It is very much about finding the story beat as you move along. With this, there's going to be much more interacting with the environment, many more questions about what a particular bookshelf looks like or how full it is that is going to build into the story. And as you are going through your narrative with the use an object action, you are actually going to be building out other players' understanding of the situation you're in. That is the wonders of the use an object action, is you are already delving into this world. You are treating the environment as more important than your combat abilities. And if you roleplay it correctly, you are actually going to be pulling your companions into the world more than into their character sheets. That's really what this section is about. This section of the entire series, as we are now finishing it up, is about getting more into the world as opposed to the character sheet. And it took us the entire series to get to the use an object action, the most broad of the actions of what it actually can or cannot do, the one that's so reliant on the world you're in, to realize that what you're trying to do in all of the other actions is get more into the world, get more into the story. And we find ourselves here at the end knowing that we are getting into the world, into the story, into the environment, and it's your interactions in that environment, the things that you were describing that you're doing, not just attacking, not just taking, but the things that you are simply picking up a piece of paper, scanning it, and then like shuffling it to the side as you're looking for the next thing. All of these little moments as you go through, they're what is going to build the story and build the connection, not only for you, but for the other players. And it's in building those connections to the environment you're in, to physically what your character is wearing, to what the other characters have to worry about. All of these small little beats that you can bring up as you're interacting with the world, all of those are going to build a much more filled out, prop heavy, significant location based environment. And it's not all on the Dungeon Master. It's based on what you want to interact with. And the more you interact, the more you do these things, the more you're willing to take time in the environment, the more full it becomes. And with that, that brings us to the close of our Use an Object episode of Action Surge. We've discussed the brief mechanics of generally how it works. We have talked about the general nature of when this is going to be used, as well as some of the story elements you can use to spice up your version of using objects. This also brings us to the end of our Action Surge series. I thank you so much for watching. If you have missed any episodes, I highly encourage you to go back. It really helps me out if you do so. Please go ahead and find me on all the social medias because I'm there, most of them. I'm sure you'll find them if you look hard enough. Just, try and stay engaged. I don't want you dashing away. Anything you can really do to help me out, I would very much appreciate it, as long as you're not casting me aside. Even, jump in the comments, even if you don't have anything nice to say, attack me down there. The algorithm likes that as well. Just, be sure to be using all those actions, and I'll see you next time.